The audience need to go and understand their audience. They need to talk to them. They need to find out what's happening. And they don't just do this once. This needs to be something they keep revisiting because it is going to keep changing. And then use that information to map customer journeys and understand how to adapt their strategy in a world where search is changing. I'm Becky Simms, and this is SEO in 2026.
Becky, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
So, we are seeing huge shifts in how people search, and my tip is that you need to stay on top of that, but not just by looking at what platforms are doing. You need to understand what users are doing, how their intent is changing, where they search.
How is user intent changing?
Well, we just have more platforms than we've ever had before. So we've been doing research at my agency, Reflect Digital, over the last 12 months, and we've committed that we're going to continue to do this research and continue polling the public to understand how people are searching. And what we're seeing is that search is just more fragmented than ever. So that 18 to 44 kind of demographic, so a big chunk of many brands, probably focused target audience, they're using at least 5 platforms, or on average 5 platforms, should we say. So actually, in some cases, even more in their search journey. So that could be everything from the beginning of their journey through to the end. So as they're kind of at awareness stage and they're filtering down their decision making through to closing their decision. But in that process, they are looking across multiple platforms and they're looking for different things. They're trying to understand what's the best option to buy, what's the best service, what's the best place to go, whatever it is they're trying to do. But they're using different platforms. And I think all the while we've got more platforms popping up. So now having all of our kind of LLM AI platforms that people are using to search, it's just making that more fragmented than ever. And businesses need to understand that because they need to be visible.
In terms of identifying actually who you reach out to, because I mean, this ongoing research is wonderful to have, obviously, but are you targeting a specific user type? I think you mentioned 18 to, was it 44 or 40, something like that? Is there a certain age range that you're targeting here with this research?
So we're doing a wide-ranging research covering all age groups, and then we've got qualifying questions each time, which are helping us to kind of slice the data to see what's changing and see and hone in on different market or different groups of people, should we say? Because I think one of the things that's interesting with the advent of AI, of how people are using it to search, is that actually occupation is now becoming a predeterminant as to how you might search. So, for example, if you work in IT, work in digital marketing like us, in a business whereby you may be more likely to be using AI at work or talking about AI at work, you are therefore also likely to be using that more to search at home for your own personal uses. Whereas actually, I think we had a group of people that put themselves that they work within performing arts, for example. And it was like 0% are using AI to search because it's just not touching their world at the moment. It's not something that they're thinking about. So suddenly, whether you're a B2B or a B2C business, actually occupation is changing the behavior of your audience. And meaning for some, you need to show up in one place where actually for others, you might not need to be visible at the moment. But again, it's going to change over time as people become more aware.
So obviously this emphasizes that it's really important for an SEO or digital marketer not to presuppose how the audience may be searching based upon their own behavior. So how do you actually go about researching what your target audience is likely to be doing in terms of behavior? Because you want to make sure that you get the right data, but obviously if people are interacting on tools like ChatGPT, they might be doing that to discover something initially and experience your brand for the first time, but then they might be doing a Google search after that to actually search for you. So it's a bit trickier, isn't it, to establish what the user actually is doing?
It really is. And it is going to continue to be tricky, I think, and get a bit hard, especially with things like the AI overviews, whereby you might be seeing the answer and therefore not even clicking through. So therefore, we don't even know that they touched our business and that they saw our answer. And they may have spotted the brand, they may not have spotted the brand, but that was still part of their journey. And we still want our brand to have been alongside giving that advice where possible. So yeah, it's really tricky. I think the key is that it's understanding your audience and being led by that first of all. So it's spending time to talk to your audience in a quantitative and a qualitative way. So whether that's surveys that go out to your audience and whether that's an annual thing or something you can do more frequently, because obviously this is something that there's a speed to how fast things are changing at the moment that we've not seen in a long while. So actually, where we've been charting this across 2025, the September edition that's coming out, it's the first time we've actually seen people using AI jump up by about 5%, and therefore people using Google move down a little bit. Whereas the previous editions, we've kind of seen it staying flat. So it's trying to understand what that looks like for your business, because yes, there's reports like we're doing, and there's reports like all of the different agencies and platforms are doing. But what that will tell you is generically what's happening. What you need to know is what's actually happening for your audience. So they'll give you some idea and they'll give you some thoughts on what you might be thinking about. But you need to know who your audience are and how they go about searching specifically for your product, so that you can understand where those touch points are to be, and also what type of content that you need to have, because at points of that journey, people are going to be expecting to see a video that they can watch. Other points in the journey, they're looking for a top 5 reasons to buy, or who knows, it's different content for different parts of the journey, which again, we just need to understand what that looks like and be thinking about how we're making sure that it is good for Google still, because for people that search on Google, when we're thinking about our content, but also good for LLMs to be able to use that content, to be able to hope that we're in their answers and they're pulling our brand to the forefront.
You mentioned the phrase customer journey a couple of times there, and I'd certainly like to come back to that. But you also mentioned you need to know who your audience are. So how do you go about really painting that picture? And what data are you looking for? And are you talking about creating personas, or how do you establish exactly who you should be speaking to?
Yeah, good question. There's a couple of different ways you can do this, but probably the easiest, especially for an established business that has got a database of people, is to look at the customers that you have had. And obviously, it needs to make sense that that's still the type of customer that you want to target going forward and that they fit where the business is going. But providing it's yes to that, then understanding who is already in your pool of customers. Now, we can get demographic info from them. We can ask them those questions. But more than anything, the most important thing when we're building out personas is understanding their motivation to buy. Why did they interact with your business? And this could be people in your database that haven't bought yet. And that's also telling and interesting to understand who sits on there that's following your newsletter, following you on social, engaged in what you say, but hasn't spent money with you, versus who are the regular customers, and trying to also look at that might give you some research that helps you move those people from newsletter signups to actual customers. But we want to know what motivates them. Like, why do they follow your brand? Why do they buy your products? And then how often do they buy? Also, again, it depends what type of business you are as to whether you're something that they would buy regularly, or if you're a once every few years kind of purchase, or a service, or a place they visit. But it's trying to understand motivation, because then you can bucket people in that way and use that as a springboard for creating content that ties into what their motivations are.
Okay, so motivation was the key word in that particular answer there. Can you establish a motivation from data, or do you need to establish that from a conversation with your customer?
You can do a bit of both. So we've got a behavioural team, and I am very grateful for them, because I've learned a lot myself on how, as humans, we can write really biased questions sometimes. So I would say that it's best to get someone that knows how to write questions that aren't biased, because I can pick it up now, but actually we often put the answer that we're expecting in the question without meaning to, and bias the answer. So you want to make sure they're unbiased questions. So you can do that in survey format and data-led, but with some qualitative questions in there. But also, you should, alongside this, try and do some more qualitative research. So whether that's getting people in a room around a table and trying to talk to them, whether it's one-on-one interviews that you do on the telephone, but you'll get some richness of that data, which no doubt will complement the actual more number-driven data that you've got through doing a survey. And you can start to feel the depth of that and the understanding, and see what it therefore means. Because sometimes you need to see them interacting with your website, your product, to realise what it is that also that's unspoken. Because there'll be some things that you'll get from a conversation that's that's kind of deeper than what they've actually said. Sometimes it might even be seeing them interact with your product is sometimes what you need to do. There's a fabulous case study of Heinz and ketchup. And I think this was back in the 50s. And they actually were bringing families in and serving them a meal with ketchup and watching what they were doing. And in this example, it was the turning point for them to bring in plastic bottles, because they realised that with the glass bottle, the child would go to pick up the ketchup. And as they went to pour it, the parent would go, no, I'll do it, because glass is dangerous and possible to break. And therefore, you then get a parent's rationed amount of ketchup, which is very different to what a child would like to put on their plate. So Heinz realised we need to change our bottle and our product by seeing that. You never would have got that in the survey. So sometimes you need to see them interact with your business to actually spot something that actually tells you a story about their journey. It might be seeing them actually go and search and how they move about online, and do a bit of that type of research as well.
Brilliant. Okay, so I guess establishing the motivation gives you the likely intent as well, and then you map that to the customer journey. So do you try to create just a singular customer journey that represents the majority of your users, or do you have multiple customer journeys?
So we would do that per kind of motivation group. So you've grouped these people together on motivation, and then you look at what they do and how they do it differently. And some of it will be the same, or points of it might always be the same. It might be that close to buying product, nearly every group will go and look at reviews, or they'll search, whether it's Google or ChatGPT, and say, what do most people think about buying this product? And try and get that review data. That might be consistent for everybody, but it might have been the upfront piece that's different. So yeah, you want to do it based on motivation. And then there are these slightly different factors. Probably we've had this conversation before where I would have said demographic isn't so important, but actually the one thing we are seeing with AI is that younger people are more motivated to use AI at the moment and feel more familiar with it than older generations. So you do kind of have that split. And then, as I say, this kind of occupation split, which is something that will go away at a point. But at the moment, while we're on this change curve and we're seeing people quite early into adopting how they search using LLMs and all our different platforms that have appeared in the last 12 to, 24 months or so as something that people are using day to day, occupation is having an effect. But as I say, I think that will fizzle out. I don't know when, but over the next year or two, that will be less of a determinator. But determinator? I don't know if that's a word.
Sounds good.
You know what I mean? It will be less of a point. But when something so new is happening, you do have these different effects. And you also have, like earlier this year, we saw the craze that hit online where people were making those kind of models of themselves on AI. They were making their version of a Barbie or whatever with their face on it. That kind of thing helps get it into more of the masses. So people that use social that might not work in a sector that meant that they've been playing with AI suddenly hear about this tool and go, oh, I want to go and play with that. They go and have a go using that, and then it means that they go, oh, this is interesting. Can it do other things for me? So there's other things that will happen that will hit the media that will bring more people on board. But it's kind of over time this will happen and change.
Okay, so you establish customer journeys based upon motivations. You can establish multiple customer journeys, but you mentioned AI there as well, bringing people on board. And another phrase that you used with me beforehand was to do well with LLMs, you need to think about brand first, using PR and ensuring reviews truly reflect your business. So how do you ensure that reviews truly reflect your business, and how does that impact the user journey when they're on LLMs?
Exactly, yes. So I guess reviews are going to be true to who your business is. So we need to smarten up our businesses if we don't like the reviews that are out there. But you need to be encouraging people to do reviews and making sure that you've got a plan around trying to get that data. Because if you think the LLM is trying to act like a human, isn't it? It's trying to speed up a process of when we're asking it, where's the best place to buy whatever we're looking for? It's trying to do all the different things that we would do. So part of what it's going to go and look for is, what do other people say about this? And one of those routes will be looking at reviews. The other will be looking at press. Like, who is this business? Who do they talk about what they do? Do other people talk about what they do? So similar to how search engines have worked, but it's just in a slightly different way that it can play that information back to you. Instead of it giving you the blue links that we're used to seeing on Google to go to the individual sources. It's pulling all of that information together and crafting you a story to answer your question and trying to speed up what you might have done and spent quite a while doing. So it's making sure we're focusing on getting reviews. It's thinking about PR. It's thinking about full marketing strategy and actually how important that is to the search journey and to being able to be found wherever people are searching, because SEO is much bigger than Google.
Becky, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
So the key takeaway for me is that the audience need to go and understand their audience. They need to talk to them. They need to find out what's happening. And they don't just do this once. This needs to be something they keep revisiting because it is going to keep changing. And then use that information to map customer journeys and understand how to adapt their strategy in a world where search is changing.
Becky Simms is founder and CEO of Reflect Digital. Find out more over at reflectdigital.co.uk. Becky, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thank you for having me.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at seoin2026.com.